We're back here again.
We're back here again for the final episode of Growth and Change. In this episode, we're going to be pushing into, the foundations, the framework, the key principles. One of the things I value about Andrew's ministry, and particularly his speaking ministry and ministry to pastors, is the desire always to go back to what the Bible has to say and also to put it in principles so that people can actually work things out. I like that, but it's also a frustration. It's a frustration because often people just want the concrete, clarified, silver bullet that'll help them actually go away and make change. But Andrew regularly pushes into principles and foundations. And so this episode, we're going to be diving into the framework. So Andrew, at the end of the book, you talk about the 5 foundations of ministry. I want to hear it briefly because we've got a book now and we can actually look at the book and read it and tease it out and pass it and critique it. So what are the 5 foundations or the 5 key principles?
Well, just to say, I think from memory, that is now just an appendix.
It is actually. It has been appendicized. Yeah, that's right.
Because that was going to be another book and it's just been stuck in there just a touch. So the 5 foundations: clarity, be faithful to inputs, take responsibility, break it down, and ecosystem. That's the shape of it.
So I want to push into maybe the third one there, the take responsibility, because in some sense that's really the push of the whole book. You're actually wanting pastors particularly to take responsibility.
That's not my sense of the push of the whole book.
Okay.
Yeah. But you don't always know the thing you've created. The push for mine is actually along the lines of clarity is king. One of the things I'm pushing for is that we sharpen what we're about.
Yep.
So we know very clearly what we're about. So we know what to say yes to and what to say no to. And so clarity, the first one, it's interesting to me. When you say to a pastor what I think we've got to be about, they go, yes. But if I just get them and say, tell me what you're hoping for in church, then 20 minutes later, I'm still not clear on what they're hoping for in church.
Don't look at me.
But it's just interesting that as I've worked with various pastors over the years, one of the key things that comes out for them is after some months of bouncing back and forth, yes, this is what I'm meant to do. And they almost kind of write it on their wall to say, that's the mantra, that's the thing. And this clarity is powerful. It brings power to leadership, to decision making, to pursuit, change, conflict, and all the rest.
And for you, that first one is all about the clarity about what we're to be on about, making mature disciples in ever increasing number.
Yeah. That's right. So getting that. So the first one I think is we assume people have more clarity than they do. I think. And even amongst our church congregations, there's a great fog. There's a real mist, and we get so many different messages from the latest thing that's come out. What we should pursue, what we should be about, the thing that matters most, and it's no wonder. So just getting back to clarity, but take responsibility. Yeah, that is a big thing. I think it goes back to this whole concern that if I'm not sure what I'm meant to achieve. And I don't think I have responsibility for achieving it, then I think we've got a package of ideas that are a recipe for disaster.
Can I push into that a little bit more? In terms of what you've seen, when people are not clear, what does that look like in church life?
Oh, churches start, or any ministry that someone comes to them wants to do, they do. There's little ability to work out whether that's a useful, helpful, good ministry. But if someone's passionate about it, we do it. Now, again, from the American scene, our dear brothers, I remember some years ago, there was a kind of unleashing a potential idea where the way you ran church was to inspire people from the front to be active and engaged and then let people go for it. Now, that can work in a rich resource environment, but Australia's not rich. We don't have unlimited resources in terms of people, time or money. God is the God of, he's unlimited in his resource, but we don't have that in churches. And so a church that tries to do anything and everything will never really sharpen the ministry and get it moving towards a direction and getting momentum and a flywheel happening. And so they'll do less than they could otherwise do. So there's one of the things. People, I don't know what to say no to. And one of the observations from many years ago, and I probably picked this up from someone else, was the notion that every yes is a no. None of us like saying no, but when you understand time's limited, to say yes to something, you've said no to something else. So clarity enables you to do that. The other thing is that the greater my clarity, therefore the greater the ability to go back through my ministries and look at the present and say, we can't keep doing that. There's a restructure that needs to happen. And if I haven't got clarity, I won't know how to do that. So we've done some big changes here over the years, very costly changes, and we've only been going 27 years. But we've had some big changes, which we were only empowered and enabled to do because we were able to be clear on what we're trying to achieve and whether that was helping or hindering. Powerfully. And as a consequence, many of those decisions have proved to be the appropriate one, but difficult nonetheless.
Your fourth foundation, you encourage pastors to spend time breaking down ministry. How's this different from the first point about clarity? Because both achieve clarity, but in break it down, what are you pushing for?
Yeah. If the big outcome we're trying to make is Matthew 28, make disciples, so win people to faith, deepen them in the faith. That can be that's an elephant. It's a massive thing. And how do you win an elephant? One mouth. If I just try and make this ministry about making disciples, I will tend not to apply the people God has given me into places that best enable it to happen. It'll be a mash of things that are going on. But if I have the ability to take that big outcome and break it down into subsidiary outcomes, parts that feed together to make that happen, then I can now start to mobilise the people, us together, the Lord has brought together, into the various places that will actually further serve that greater outcome. So it's just a way of organising ourselves, really. Now, is it inappropriate to organise ourselves? Not at all. I mean, it's an organism. Church is a body with various features and dimensions that all work together. Each is gifted in different ways. And so paying attention to how to mobilise the different giftings in a way that actually adds together to achieve one outcome instead of letting us all run amok is an important skill and an important activity to engage in, to break it down. Now, there's numbers of ways you can break it down. This is, I'm not advocating one way to break it down. Reach Australia, the ministry we're a part of, is not doing the same. We have a couple of things that we think do work. But one way or another, you've got to break down that. If I'm going to clean the house, I've got to break that down into clean that room, do this task. This is just the way you do big things. I'm going to build a bridge. I've got to break it down.
So foundation element 5, though, is very different to that. So you're breaking down so you can actually hand over responsibility, mobilise a team, understand what's going on, understand linkages and where blockages are in the system. How does understanding church as an ecosystem, how is it different to that? How does it help you as a pastor continue to get that clarity that you're pushing for?
Good. First thing to say, whether we like it or not, church is a system. So sometimes people react with this kind of, that sounds very corporate or impersonal or something.
Or there's that pushback about church should be a bit more organic.
Yeah.
And this is how the Spirit moves.
Yeah. But the fact is, it is a system. And I don't think we're very equipped to make sense of that often. And one of the things that can help us in this is the organic piece. There's a new psychology around called family systems therapy, newish. And And one of the things it observes is that in a family, in an organic experience of father, mother, kids and so on, there's a system of relationships that occurs where the way a person's behaving is actually shaped by the way others relate to them and relate to each other. The whole thing interacts so that you have a system that's occurring. Now, you see that in nature, of course, but bodies are a system where one part plays into another part and makes a difference to another part. And one of the interesting things about systems is that you can change one part and the consequence of that won't be directly connected to it. It'll happen over here somewhere else because of the interconnectedness nature of the body. So I have a sore knee. It's not because the knee's the problem. It's because my back's out of whack. This is the nature of systems. We are in a system. As soon as you get more than a dozen people together, or even smaller, you've got this complex set of relationships that play out with each other, which therefore means two more things. To bring about change in the church community, if you understand and recognise it's a system, to bring about change in an individual in it, it's not sufficient just to work with the individual. I noticed many decades ago, I could disciple a young man who was in one church. I was on a uni ministry. I could disciple a young man in one church. He came to uni and he went back to his church. Disciple and get more traction with this young man in that church because the church culture within which he sat was itself reinforcing and enhancing the things I was working with him on. Whereas this man would go back to that church, which was undermining and undoing. So I don't bring about change in an individual simply by paying attention to them as an individual. This is my little contention about one-to-one discipling. It's an important piece, but it's not the key to change in life. I've got to pay attention to the organism of the community they're in and how that's playing out. So one of the illustrations I've used for this is the school. If I come in as the principal of a school and there are poor educational standards happening in the school and I want to see educational standards lifted, what do? Well, a non-system thinker will just go, I need to get better teachers to teach better. But someone who recognises, no, the whole environment is a system will say, do you know what we also need is uniforms. We need to bring in a uniform policy and enforce it. We need to clean up the grounds. We need to pay attention to how the buildings... Because all of that speaks to and interacts with how people feel and respond and engage. And so recognising that complexity means that the way I bring about change is paying attention to all the bits and not just you as an individual.
One of the ways you've described that, drawn it, so to speak, or tried to help to illustrate it is the Pentagon.
Yeah.
So you talk about wanting to see a follower of Jesus, a deep disciple, a mature disciple, deep in the Word, loving God, on mission, belonging in community, and serving others. How does that framework, how does that picture kind of help you in the work of making disciples?
Yeah. It particularly pays attention to the third thing that comes when you appreciate the church community as a system. So it is a system, pay attention to it. How to bring about change is recognising lots of things go together to bring about change in the individual. But the third one is recognising there's actually a compelling beauty to all the parts working together. This is my concern about pathway thinking about churches. Connect, grow, serve. Do you know that little thing we used to use? Or even the kind of pathway we talk about. One of the dangers with that is that it so dismantles church life into siloed components that you never see the whole thing actually work together as an organic, beautiful... I use the illustration of the rose, that when you see a rose, there's something beautiful about it, but if you were to dissect it into its colour, its this colour and its texture and its smell and its shape, there's the rose. You go, it's not very impressive, is it? Well, that's sometimes what we do with churches, where we break it down into component parts, do a pathway, mobilise. We end up with organism of church broken down into silos where people are, my job is this one, your job is that one. Ecosystem, and the Pentagon is trying to say, no, you need to put it all back together. You actually need to say there are a number of things that we need to take responsibility for, and they all interact with each other. They all work together to produce the outcome of a disciple. And so as a leader, what I want to do is make sure each of those things is happening, but happening in a way that feeds into each other. So it's not isolated out into siloed.
Can you give us some practical examples? Because for someone whose their church is not thinking as an ecosystem at the moment, how does that work on a practical level in terms of your team or your ministries?
What I want to create in church is Acts 2. Do you know, where they all there was an organic spontaneity of them gathering together to share the word and share a meal and so on and so forth. So that's what I'm wanting to get, that beautiful picture of this organic thing. How does it play out? Well, one of the challenges is you can, for instance, we need to pay attention to new people coming to church and make sure they get welcomed and connected. You know, we call it connect or whatever. Now, you can almost inadvertently delegate the welcoming, caring function to a team of people. So someone sits in church and goes, that's their job. My job is, no. What I want to create is a church where everyone's a welcomer. Everyone's caring and pastoraling, and everyone's deep in the word and speaking the word to each other, and everyone is loving God and stirring each other to love God. And so my task is to not only have particular responsibilities given to some to particularly champion that concern, but do it in a way that stirs all of us to be about all of that as well. Now, that's a harder leadership exercise, because now what I've got to do is not just delegate and give off siloed tasks. Now I've got to make sure it all comes together. Now I've got to make sure that what's happening, connecting and welcoming and caring for people is part of the whole culture of everything that happens everywhere. That the deep in the word structures are not just delegated to growth groups, but it's part of everything we do everywhere. Now that requires kind of an integration, meetings, communication, decision-making, ownership. One of the things we say to all our leaders is that we want you to own the whole of this ministry more than you own your part. So we want you to see your part as feeding into the outcome of the whole, and we want you to be 1 millimetre more committed to the whole than the part. I think I stole that language from someone else. But that's the kind of exercise we're doing here to try and put it all back together.
You're seeking clarity, but in some senses, ecosystem thing is complexifying. I don't know if that's a word, but you're actually wanting people to see that it's more complex than this.
Yeah, that's why it comes after. So clarity, what's the big thing I'm after? Take responsibility for those big things. Continue to be faithful to the inputs, of course. Break it down so you can resource and grow to it. Then put it back together. And if you're not doing that last piece, you won't see the change that you want to see, and you won't see the beauty of it like you want to see. You want people to come into church and have and come into an Acts 2, 1 Corinthians 14 and go, wow, this is a place I've never seen and experienced before. Not come into a place where there's people tasked with jobs that you get passed through.
Someone might be listening to this and they're a pastor thinking, I've been trained to preach the word and to pray, and we've been talking about inputs and outputs and structured thinking. What's the place of preaching the word, prayer? Is that in there somewhere?
Yes, of course. It's the as we've portrayed the Pentagon, the foundation of it is the word, deep in the word. Because and we've tried to express this idea that it's not just one step on a pathway. It's not like you come through welcoming and then you get connected into a place where you now get the word. The intention is that the word of God, everything bastes in the word of God. It infiltrates and is baked into everything. So the word of God shapes all we do. Prayer, of course, is part of the expression of what it is to love God. So we've articulated a priority that is about Godwoodness, if you like, and that priority, of course, carries with it a relationship with Him that's expressed prayerfully, and in godliness and holiness and repentance. And now you can find another way to break it down, but the point of breaking it down is to say that there are parts that need to be paid attention to, but they work together. They're not isolated. And on the break it down, you just triggered a thought there for me too. On the break it down, there are parts that need to be paid attention to. And if you don't put a person responsible to pay attention to it, it tends not to happen. It's just a human reality. If someone hasn't got particular focus and eyes on it, it'll drift.
I guess my question was also pushing more specifically into the whole framework. The person who's sitting there, who's thinking about the role of the pastor teacher, who's never thought about structuring church, who's never thought about breaking down disciple making into specific tangible things. I guess just speaking to them a little in terms of this is what I was trained for at theological college. This is the kind of role. Now you're actually asking bigger questions about the way church is structured, about the way we together think about disciple making. Any thoughts for that person who's listening and thinking, that sounds like a lot of work? Isn't this what I was trained for? Isn't this what my role is?
Yeah. Don Carson has a very good article on Themelios. We point this out to people quite a bit, that he pays attention to the different words that are used for the leadership of churches, so elder, overseer. And he makes the point that the language of overseer in its cultural context is speaking not just to leadership, but the kind of leadership that's a management organisational leadership. Whereas eldership carries the sense of the older, responsible, exemplar, and so on. And so what he offers, and I think this is right, is that you are not equipped to be the elder of a church if you have no ability, and I'm using extreme language, but you're not equipped to be the elder of a church if you have no ability in managing the household. And yes, you need to be apt to teach, because the way God engages with us is through His Word by His Spirit, and the proclamation of that Word is central and fundamental and foundational, which is what we're seeking to show. But mobilising the saints, Ephesians chapter 4, and managing the resources God has given us as an overseer is part and parcel of what we do. Did you not learn that at Bible college? That's okay. I personally don't think Bible college should be set up to teach us how to do the organisational management of church. I think we need at least 3 years, but I think 4 years to be so deep in the Word that becomes the flavour of who we are. But you need to learn it somewhere. And I think historically what we've thought of as Christian denominations is that a Bible college will give you the theology, the Bible knowledge and so on and so forth, how to preach and teach. But you'll learn the practical skills of organising, managing, leading a church in your Sunday weekend ministry through college. But what I think's happened is that either there's been a progressive decline in the abilities of those things and interest in those things in churches, such that even though I put someone to be trained in those churches on a weekend, they're not learning it there either anymore. So we need to inject a new piece. Yeah.
Or is there an or at the end of that as well? So there's something in our training that is missing. We're not getting those pieces. Is it after you finish college? Is it before you finish college? You should be learning those things, or is it just as a minister you should be paying attention to that the whole life of your ministry? Trying to think through how to get better at the leadership of yourself and the management of your team.
Well, talking ecosystems, the whole training movement from saved congregation member, mature member into full-time ministry training at a college out, that whole movement is itself an ecosystem. And so if we're going to bring about change in the leader of a church, that they're equipped and able to be the person they need to be, we need to pay attention to that whole thing. It's not sufficient to write a book. Do you know what I mean? It's not sufficient just to speak to a pastor and say. What we need to do is actually start to lift the heat in every church, that the young men and women growing up within it actually are just, their mother's milk is, I lead people. I learn how to manage and organise the resources here to bring about a better outcome, so that I've got all of that as I go to college. Now, that's not happening at present. So what do? Well, we've got to do what we can at the back end after it all to change leaders so that they might grow churches down further the pipeline that actually produces better an outcome so that Reach Australia disappears in some years' time.
Excellent. Well, Andrew, it's been great hearing more about your book. Really, really helpful to hear your heart for Australia, your heart for transform lives, and your desire to actually see pastors better equipped to grow the church that we have the privilege of serving. It's been great talking to you these last 4 episodes, and I look forward to the second book.
We will see.